For years, a billionaire believed his only son, born with autism, paralysis, and other severe conditions, would never speak, move, or connect with the world. He tried everything: doctors, therapies, specialists, but nothing worked. Then, a new maid was hired. She was quiet, gentle, and had no medical training, but what she discovered inside that silent mansion changed everything. Hidden behind the child's silence was a heartbreaking truth and a miracle waiting to happen. Before we continue with this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and like the video. Oh, and don't forget to comment below where you're watching us from. We love to know that. Richard Wakefield, a once active billionaire who now lives in isolation, begins each day with the same quiet hope. Maybe today, something will change. His world, once filled with business meetings and luxurious travel, now revolves around his 6-year-old son, Noah. Noah has autism, paralysis, and Down syndrome. He does not speak, move, or show signs that he understands what is happening around him. Richard spends most of his time by Noah's side in their large, quiet mansion. He talks to him gently, reads to him, and sometimes just sits with him in silence. Every morning, nurses and therapists arrive with the latest tools and treatments. Despite their efforts, Noah shows no reaction. Still, Richard pays close attention, looking for any small sign, a blink, a sound, a movement. He remembers the days with his late wife, before the silence took over their home. Now, all his love and attention are focused on Noah, his only connection left. Richard has tried everything modern science and medicine have to offer. He has hired top neurologists, therapists, and behavior specialists from around the world. They come to the mansion with expensive equipment and complex theories. Richard watches each session closely, learning every term and asking detailed questions. He reads late into the night, searching medical journals and autism forums for something new he hasn't tried. He built a special therapy room filled with colorful lights, calming music, and sensory tools. Nothing works. Noah remains still and silent. Some doctors suggest acceptance. Richard should learn to live with the situation. But Richard refuses. He believes there's more to Noah than what anyone sees. He's convinced his son is aware, trapped inside his body, trying to reach out. He won't give up. Every failed attempt only makes him try harder. Even when others walk away, Richard stays, determined to break through the wall separating him from his son. Each day in the mansion follows a strict routine. Richard wakes early and checks Noah's monitors. He prepares a soft breakfast for him, even though Noah must be fed through a tube. He speaks to him kindly as he adjusts his pillows, dresses him, and moves him to his therapy chair. The staff follows a schedule of activities: movement exercises, speech therapy, visual stimulation, and music sessions. Richard attends each one, sometimes helping, always watching. He takes notes on everything: what music was played, what time a certain therapy started, what Noah wore. He keeps track of even the smallest changes, hoping to find a pattern. The house is always quiet, except for the sounds of machines and the gentle voices of caregivers. Richard rarely leaves. His life has narrowed to one purpose: being there for Noah. Even on the hardest days, when he feels exhausted and hopeless, he shows up again the next morning, ready to try all over again. Despite the silence and lack of progress, Richard's love for Noah grows stronger. He speaks to him as if he were listening. He tells stories about his mother, about the world outside, and about his own childhood. He shares memories and feelings, even though Noah never responds. Sometimes Richard plays old videos of his wife, showing Noah her smile, her voice, hoping it might reach him. At night, Richard sits by Noah's bed, reading books aloud. He talks to the doctors often, asking what else can be done, what new treatments are being tested elsewhere. He invests money into medical research, hoping for breakthroughs that might one day help his son. Many nights end with Richard staring out the window, tired and lonely, but never defeated. He still believes Noah is in there somewhere, behind the silence. And that belief keeps him going, even when there is no sign that anything is changing. The pain Richard feels is constant. He misses his wife deeply and often imagines what life would be like if she were still there. He thinks she would know what to do. Her absence is another silent presence in the mansion. But the weight that truly hurts is the lack of response from Noah. Richard pours everything into him, time, energy, love, but there is never a return. No eye contact, no hand squeeze, no smile. Some days Richard breaks down in private. He cries in the hallway, careful never to show weakness in front of Noah. Then he washes his face and returns to his son's side. His friends and business partners have drifted away, unable to understand the life he now leads. But Richard doesn't care. His entire world is inside that house. He repeats to himself each day that something is still possible. He doesn't know when, but he feels sure that one day Noah will give him a sign, no matter how small. And so, the days go on. The house remains still, filled with quiet care and silent hope. Richard continues the routine with the same patience and dedication. Therapists come and go, experts try and fail, but he never gives up. He holds Noah's hand, adjusts his blanket, talks to him about what happened that day. Noah never moves, he never speaks, yet Richard stays close, convinced that something inside his son can still hear him. The silence is heavy, but it does not push Richard away. It pulls him closer. He listens carefully, hoping that one day Noah will break through. Until then, he will be there, every day, doing everything he can. The pain of not knowing is strong, but the love is stronger. No matter what anyone says, Richard believes that one day, somehow, he will reach his son, and so he keeps trying without rest, without reward, because he still believes. Julia Bennett arrived at the Wakefield mansion with a small suitcase and a heart still heavy from grief. Not long ago, she had lost her newborn daughter, a tragedy that left her feeling empty and without direction. Trying to rebuild her life, she had accepted a job as a housekeeper in the large, quiet mansion owned by Richard Wakefield. The house was huge, clean and cold. Everything was in perfect order, but it didn't feel alive. No sounds of laughter, no music, not even casual conversation. From the moment she stepped inside, Julia felt the sadness in the air. The staff spoke little, moving like shadows through the halls. Richard welcomed her politely but without warmth. He explained the basic rules and told her about Noah, his son. Julia listened carefully and nodded. She didn't ask questions. She only wanted a chance to do something useful, something that gave her days a bit of meaning again. Julia's first days at the mansion were quiet. She cleaned, organized, and followed the routine given to her. The other staff kept to themselves, and Julia didn't try to get too close. She noticed how everything had a specific place, and any change, even small, seemed unwelcome. The house ran like a machine, but it lacked heart. She was told about Noah, 6 years old, unable to speak or move, and rarely showed any signs of awareness. The nurses and therapists cared for him carefully, but always in a clinical way. Julia didn't try to join them. She just watched. One afternoon, while wiping dust from the bookshelves, she saw Noah for the first time. He was lying in a reclining chair, eyes unfocused, body still. She stood a few steps away, said nothing, and just observed him for a few minutes. She didn't smile too much or speak loudly. She didn't try to make him respond. She simply respected his space. As days passed, Julia began to spend more time near Noah, but she stayed quiet and calm. Instead of trying to make him look at her or move, she simply talked about simple things. What she was cleaning that day, what the weather looked like outside, what she used to cook for her daughter. She never expected a reaction. She just let her presence be gentle and steady. Slowly, the energy around her started to feel different. The room where Noah stayed didn't feel as cold anymore. Julia brought small things with her: a soft toy, a scarf with bright colors, a music box with simple tunes. She never pushed them on Noah. She just left them nearby. Richard noticed but didn't say anything at first. He simply watched from the hallway. Over time, Julia's quiet attitude began to affect the people in the house. The silence remained, but it wasn't as heavy. It was softer now, less hopeless. One morning, Julia was organizing the upper floor and came across a narrow hallway she hadn't noticed before. It was darker, the air felt unused. At the end of the hallway was a door, slightly open. Inside was a storage room filled with furniture and boxes covered in sheets. As she scanned the room, her eyes stopped on a tall, dark cabinet with labels stuck to it. The labels were old, faded, with writing she couldn't read clearly. The cabinet was locked. Julia stood there quietly for a moment. She didn't try to open it. She felt something strange, a kind of pressure in her chest that she couldn't explain. But she didn't force anything. She turned around and left the room, closing the door behind her. That day, something in her shifted. She couldn't stop thinking about the cabinet, but she didn't mention it to anyone. It stayed in her mind like a question waiting for the right time. In the following days, small changes began to appear around Noah. They were subtle at first. One day, Julia saw his fingers twitch slightly when she placed a soft cloth in his hand. Another time, he blinked twice while she played a gentle song from her music box. Julia didn't react with excitement. She didn't call the others to prove what she saw. Instead, she smiled gently and continued talking to him as usual. When Richard walked by and noticed the movement, he froze. He didn't say anything, but his eyes filled with something close to hope. Julia continued her calm, patient approach. She didn't believe in miracles, but she believed in presence, in showing up, in being kind without expecting anything. And maybe that was what made the difference. The house, once filled with a heavy silence, now had moments where it almost felt alive again. Like the sadness hadn't disappeared, but had made room for something new. Julia didn't know what was happening exactly, but she felt that the house was changing, not in a loud or dramatic way, but slowly, like it was waking up from a long sleep. The routines continued, the silence remained, but something was different now. Even the staff seemed to walk with less tension. Richard didn't smile, but his eyes followed Noah more often. Julia noticed these things and kept doing her work. She still passed by that forgotten hallway sometimes, still remembered the cabinet, but didn't return to it. Her focus stayed on Noah. Each small gesture he made gave her a reason to keep going. Each tiny sign told her that maybe he wasn't as far away as everyone thought. Maybe he just needed time and calm, and someone who wasn't trying to fix him, just be there. Whatever it was, something inside the house, inside Noah, had started to shift. Something now breathed differently. Over time, Julia began to notice things no one else did. She didn't go looking for signs of improvement in Noah, she simply paid attention. While others focused on charts, scans, and scheduled routines, Julia saw the small things. A quick movement of his eyes when the curtains swayed. A slight twitch in his fingers when someone dropped a metal spoon nearby. A tiny shift in his posture when the sun came through the window and landed on his legs. These weren't big changes, but to Julia, they mattered. She didn't rush to report them. She didn't want Noah to become a checklist of reactions. She just observed quietly and adjusted how she behaved around him. Some fabrics seemed to bother him. Certain sounds made him blink more. She took mental notes, choosing clothes with softer textures and avoiding loud noises when nearby. With each day, her bond with Noah grew, not through words, but through quiet understanding. Julia began to understand something the therapists had missed. Noah reacted better when no one expected anything from him. The high-tech machines, flashing lights, and clinical voices never seemed to reach him. But when things were calm, when the house was just living its daily life, that's when he seemed most present. Julia made small changes in his routine. She opened the windows during the day to let in fresh air. She played soft, natural sounds from outside instead of recorded music. She moved slowly and kept her voice low. She even started bringing Noah to different parts of the house, places the staff never used for therapy. One of his favorite spots became the old back porch, where he could sit and feel the breeze. There, without pressure or expectations, he blinked more often, moved his fingers, and once even turned his head slightly toward the garden. Julia didn't cheer or call for anyone. She just sat beside him. Their bond grew stronger each day, not because of progress measured by medical standards, but because of the connection that formed in silence. Julia spent more and more time near Noah, not trying to teach or cure, but simply to be with him. Sometimes she would fold clothes next to his chair, other times she would hum lightly while cleaning. He never answered with words, but his body was no longer completely still. His eyes sometimes followed her as she moved around the room. When she placed a small object in his hand, he gripped it for a second longer than before. It was enough to tell her that something inside him was aware, not trapped, not gone, just quiet. Julia began to understand that her role wasn't to fix him. It was to create a space where he felt safe. A space without pressure. A space where his silence was not a problem, but part of how he existed. One afternoon, while handling the laundry, something unexpected happened. Julia was sorting clothes in the laundry room, checking pockets, closing zippers, and separating whites from colors. Noah was sitting nearby in his special chair, his body resting as usual. The washing machine was already running, making its usual spinning sound. Julia, distracted, accidentally dropped a sock and bent down quickly to grab it. When she came back up, she made a silly face toward Noah without thinking, something she used to do with her daughter during chores. To her surprise, Noah let out a short, soft laugh. Julia froze for a second, not sure she had heard it right. But when she looked at him, his mouth was open, and a smile was forming. It wasn't forced or random, it was real. She didn't shout or cry. She just smiled back. Then she sat beside him, kept folding laundry, and continued talking to him in the same soft tone. Later that same day, after putting away most of the clothes, Julia picked up a towel from the basket. As she folded it carefully, a small label slipped out from one of the corners. It was handwritten, a bit faded, but still clear. It read the name of a clinic she didn't recognize. Julia paused, holding the towel in midair. Her brow furrowed as she stared at the label. The name didn't match any of the therapy centers or hospitals she had heard Richard mention. It looked old. Maybe it was from a time before she came to the mansion. Her mind began to wander. Was this clinic connected to Noah's early treatment? Was there something Richard never talked about? She didn't know, and she didn't want to make guesses. She folded the towel and placed it aside, keeping the label in her pocket just in case. Something about it didn't sit right, but she chose not to worry for now. As Julia finished tidying up, she heard a soft sound behind her. When she turned, Noah was approaching slowly in his wheelchair, being guided by a nurse. But what caught Julia's attention was his face. He was looking directly at her. His eyes were focused, not just staring into space like before. She stopped what she was doing and crouched down to meet his eye level. She smiled, and he gave another soft smile in return, smaller than before, but just as real. Julia felt something shift in that moment. Something inside Noah was starting to come forward, little by little. Not because of machines or therapy schedules or medical charts, but because someone had simply stayed by his side, noticed him, and treated him with patience. Julia smiled wider, stood up, and welcomed him into the room like it was the most normal thing in the world. She didn't mention the label again. Her focus was all on him now. It was a regular afternoon, just like many others before it. The sun was still high, casting light through the laundry room window. Julia stood by the table, folding freshly dried clothes, sorting towels into piles. She moved with calm, not in a rush. Noah was nearby, sitting in his wheelchair, facing her. Over the past few weeks, he had started showing more interest in simple things, and lately he had enjoyed being in the laundry room with her. Julia had started letting him touch the soft clothes once they were dry. Sometimes he rubbed the fabric between his fingers or looked at how it folded. She didn't ask for more than that. Today he seemed more alert. His eyes followed her movements. She picked up a colorful shirt, shook it out, and smiled at him. "You like this one?" she asked. Noah didn't answer, but his eyes stayed on the shirt. That was enough for Julia. As she kept folding, she started chatting casually. Her tone was light, almost playful. "I wonder," she said with a small smile, "would you even fit inside this washing machine?" She pointed at the open machine door, half joking, not expecting anything. To her surprise, Noah grinned. It wasn't a big smile, but it was clear. His eyes lit up slightly, and then in a sudden burst of energy, he leaned forward. With careful, slow movements, he shifted in his wheelchair until he was close to the machine. Then, very gently, he placed his head against the open door of the washing machine. He didn't speak, but he laughed. A soft, breathy laugh that Julia had only heard once before. She blinked, surprised, but happy. "Oh, really? You think you'd fit?" she said, laughing along with him. Her laugh was louder, full of joy. The moment felt natural, silly and perfect, like a piece of normal life. Julia crouched down beside him, still laughing. Noah leaned into the door again, his small shoulders shaking slightly with amusement. It was so simple, yet so different from how things used to be. A few weeks ago, this kind of interaction felt impossible, but now here he was, choosing to engage, choosing to laugh. Julia didn't want to ruin the moment with questions or overreactions. She just stayed next to him, enjoying it. She picked up a soft towel and gently placed it on his head like a hat. "Laundry crown for the king," she said with a grin. Noah laughed again. His body remained mostly still, but his face said everything. His joy was quiet, but real. Julia sat cross-legged on the floor now, watching him. No machines were involved, no therapists, just two people in a room full of clothes sharing a moment. It was the most alive she had seen him. At that exact moment, the front door opened downstairs. Richard had returned from a long day at work. He carried his briefcase in one hand, loosened his tie with the other, and walked through the quiet house toward the back rooms. Normally, he went to his office first or checked in with the staff. But today, something drew him straight to the laundry room. Maybe it was the distant sound of laughter, something he hadn't heard in his house for years. He reached the laundry room door and turned the handle slowly. When the door opened, he stopped. What he saw froze him in place for a few seconds. Julia was sitting on the floor, laughing. His son Noah was leaning playfully against the open door of the washing machine, smiling and laughing quietly. There was no therapy session, no equipment, no pressure. Just a moment, real and raw, happening in front of him. Richard didn't speak at first. He just stood there, holding the door open, watching the scene unfold. His heart raced a little. He had spent years trying to reach Noah, using every medical tool and expert available. And now, here was his son laughing, genuinely. Not because someone told him to, not in response to a test, but because he was enjoying himself. Julia looked up and saw Richard standing there. Her smile faded for a second, unsure of what he might say. But then she saw his face. His eyes weren't angry or confused. They were wide with shock, but soft with emotion. He looked at Noah, then at her, and stepped into the room slowly. "He's laughing?" Richard asked, voice low, almost afraid to disturb the moment. Julia nodded gently. "Yes," she said, "he is." And with that, the silence returned, but not an empty silence. It was a silence filled with feeling. For the first time, Richard walked over and crouched next to his son. He looked at Noah, who still had a smile on his face, eyes full of light. It wasn't the same boy Richard had come home to every day. Something had shifted. Richard reached out, gently touching Noah's arm. "Hi, buddy," he said quietly. Noah didn't speak, but he didn't turn away either. That was new. Julia stood up and gave them space. She didn't want to interrupt what was happening. Richard stayed beside his son, still processing what he had seen. He looked around the room, just clothes, a washing machine, and a woman who had chosen to be kind without expecting anything in return. It wasn't a dramatic change, but it was unforgettable. That image, his son smiling beside a washing machine, was now locked in his mind. He would remember it forever. It was the first time he had seen Noah truly happy. After that light and unexpected moment in the laundry room, something began to change in Noah. It wasn't immediate or dramatic, but noticeable to those who paid attention, especially Julia. Over the next few days, Noah seemed more awake, more connected to his surroundings. He followed movement with his eyes more often. His fingers moved slightly when textures brushed against his skin. Sometimes he would make soft sounds. Nothing clear, just breathy tones, but sounds that had not been there before. Julia didn't push him. She kept things the same, folding clothes, talking gently, moving at a calm pace. Richard, now more observant than ever, started joining them in these moments. He didn't bring doctors or machines. He just sat with them, watching, listening, trying to understand what had shifted. There was no big announcement, no celebration, just small moments where Noah responded. Julia knew these signs were important, but also delicate. She treated each one with quiet respect, never rushing progress. On a late afternoon, as the sun started dipping outside the tall windows, Julia and Noah were once again in the laundry room. The atmosphere was peaceful. Clothes were neatly folded in piles. The soft hum of the dryer filled the background. Julia handed Noah a small towel, and he took it weakly, holding it between his hands. He looked at it for a while, then glanced up at her. She smiled and continued folding. There had been a few moments like this recently, Noah trying to engage, showing curiosity in simple things. Julia spoke in her usual tone, talking about how many towels they still had left, how she used to wash baby clothes the same way. She wasn't teaching, just sharing. Noah seemed to enjoy it. Then came a moment of silence. Julia placed another shirt on the table, and as she turned toward him, she noticed Noah pointing. His hand moved slowly but clearly in the direction of the pile of clothes. Julia stopped and crouched beside him. "What is it?" she asked softly. Noah looked at her, then back at the pile. Then, in a voice barely louder than a whisper, he said, "Rupa." The word was soft, unsure, but real. Julia's heart jumped, but her face remained calm. She looked at him carefully. "Yes," she said, pointing at the same pile. "Rupa's." She didn't raise her voice, didn't call anyone into the room. She simply acknowledged it with warmth, as if he had always spoken. She didn't want to overwhelm him. Noah kept his eyes on her for a few more seconds, then looked back at the clothes. Julia sat next to him, quiet but present. She knew what had just happened. That one word, small as it was, meant everything. It wasn't just sound, it was communication. It was Noah choosing to speak. And she knew this was a beginning, not a one-time event. Richard had just returned from his office when he heard a small voice in the distance. He couldn't make out the word, but something in the tone made him stop. He walked quickly toward the laundry room. When he opened the door, he saw Julia sitting on the floor next to Noah. Nothing looked unusual, but the air felt different. Richard stepped inside. "Everything okay?" he asked. Julia looked up at him and nodded. "Yes." He said something. Richard's heart raced. "What did he say?" She stood up slowly, keeping her eyes on Noah. "He said Rupa." He pointed and said it. Richard walked over, kneeling down in front of his son. "You said Rupa?" he asked, his voice cracking a little. Noah looked at him, not speaking again, but still calm. Richard took his son's hand gently, holding it between his own. His eyes filled with tears. He didn't speak either. The moment said enough. It was the first time Richard had ever heard his son say a word. All the years of silence, of effort, of watching and hoping had led to this. One soft word, one sign that Noah could express something on his own. Richard didn't try to repeat it, didn't beg for more. He simply stayed there, kneeling, holding Noah's hand. Julia stayed nearby, still folding slowly, giving them space. She didn't want to turn the moment into something too big. She understood the importance of letting progress grow naturally. Overreaction could bring pressure, and pressure had never helped Noah. Instead, she kept the atmosphere steady and calm, just as it had been before. Richard wiped his face and looked at Julia. "Thank you," he said simply. She nodded. No speeches, no long words, just understanding. She went back to work, and Noah sat quietly. But something had changed, not just in him, but in both of them. In the hours that followed, the house remained quiet, but the energy was different. Richard stayed with Noah longer that evening. He didn't go to his office. He didn't check his phone. He simply sat with his son, sometimes holding his hand, sometimes just sitting near. Julia prepared dinner, moving through the kitchen with the same steady rhythm. She didn't need to share the news with the other staff. It wasn't a victory to be announced. It was a fragile new step. And those steps needed care. Richard understood that now. Noah didn't say any more words that evening. He remained quiet, but not in the same distant way as before. His eyes followed movement. He watched the light. And when Julia passed by with a folded blanket, he smiled again. No one asked him for more. They had learned that the smallest things held the most meaning, especially when they came from someone like Noah. This wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a sign that everything would suddenly change. Julia knew that. Richard knew it too, but still the moment was unforgettable. One word, spoken softly, had opened a door that had always seemed locked. It didn't fix everything, and it didn't need to. What mattered was that it happened. That Noah, in his own time and in his own way, had chosen to speak. The road ahead was still long. There would be more quiet days, more challenges, but something was different now. The silence wasn't as heavy. It didn't feel final. It felt like part of a bigger process, one that had finally begun to move. Julia continued with her work, treating each day the same, always with care. Richard, for the first time in years, felt real hope, and in the middle of it all was Noah, still quiet, still slow, but no longer unreachable. He had spoken, and that changed everything. While cleaning the office one morning, Julia was organizing papers, wiping down shelves and checking drawers for old items that could be discarded. The room was rarely used now. Richard mostly worked in his bedroom or stayed with Noah, and the space had become more like a storage room than an office. As she moved around the desk, dusting carefully, she noticed a drawer that didn't open. She pulled it gently a few times, then saw a small keyhole hidden near the handle. Curious, she checked the nearby drawers and compartments for a key. It took a few minutes, but she finally found a small, rusted key taped beneath a stack of books inside a box labeled MISC. She inserted it slowly, and the drawer clicked open. Inside, she found a thick folder. The front of the folder read, "Noah Wakefield, Private." Her hands froze for a moment, but then she sat down and opened it carefully. The folder was full of medical reports, all with Noah's name, organized by date. Julia began to read slowly. At first, it looked like standard health records, neurological exams, physical therapy plans, routine test results. But then, the language in the document started to change. Words like restraint protocol, behavioral suppression, and emotional containment strategy began to appear often. She read about medications used off-label, high dosages for someone so young, and long sessions of neutral zone isolation, which meant keeping Noah alone in a controlled room for extended periods with no contact. Her eyes moved quickly now, scanning for more. One report described Noah's reactions as non-compliant and erratic, followed by the decision to increase dosage and apply corrective containment. Julia's face slowly changed as she read. She felt her stomach turn. These weren't just treatments. These were harsh, invasive methods that treated Noah not as a child, but as a subject to be controlled and silenced. Julia pushed the folder aside and sat back, trying to process what she had just read. She had never seen Richard act cruelly toward his son. On the contrary, he had always shown patience and care. But something about these documents didn't fit with the man she had come to know. She took one of the reports and typed the doctor's name into her phone. His name was familiar, Dr. Howard Levitt. She found articles, discussions in forums, even some legal reports. It didn't take long to find complaints from other families. One mother had spoken out about how her daughter was kept isolated for months under Dr. Levitt's care. Another described aggressive drug use to stabilize children. The same terms Julia had read, emotional suppression, response inhibition, were repeated in these stories. It was all connected. This wasn't just a questionable treatment plan, it was a pattern. And somehow, Richard had trusted this man with Noah for years. As she kept reading, the weight of the truth settled in her chest. It wasn't just the methods that disturbed her. It was how long they had gone on without question. Noah had spent years under this man's control. The silence, the stiffness, the emotional distance, it all made more sense now. It wasn't just the result of his conditions. It might have been the result of trauma caused by those so-called treatments. Julia looked at Noah's recent progress, his laughter, his first word, the small signs of trust, and realized how far he had come despite what had been done to him. She closed the folder carefully, her hands shaking a little. She didn't know if Richard had ever read all these details, or if he had chosen to believe only what the doctor told him. But either way, the truth was now in front of her, and it was impossible to ignore. This information was a bomb. Julia spent the rest of the day thinking about what to do. She didn't want to confront Richard without being sure of how much he already knew. Maybe he had been desperate, maybe he believed the doctor was doing what was best, or maybe he had looked the other way, hoping for any kind of result. But now, Noah's silence had a new meaning. Behind his condition, behind the medical terms and expert opinions, there might have been fear. Fear planted by procedures meant to shut him down instead of help him grow. Julia felt angry. Angry at the doctor. Angry at the system that allowed him to keep practicing. But more than that, she felt protective. Noah had trusted her in his quiet way. He had smiled, he had spoken, he had started to return. And now she understood just how much he had been through. It wasn't just therapy that had failed him. It was people. That night, Julia placed the folder in a separate drawer and locked it again, keeping the key with her. She wasn't ready to bring it up yet. She needed to be careful. This wasn't a secret that could be shared lightly. It had consequences, not just for Richard and Noah, but possibly for other families as well. She made a copy of one report and tucked it into her bag, just in case. Then she walked quietly to Noah's room. He was resting, eyes closed, but not asleep. She sat beside him and gently placed a hand on his arm. "You're safe now," she whispered. "I know what they did. I'm sorry." Noah didn't respond, but his fingers moved slightly under her touch. Julia stayed there for a long time, saying nothing more. She knew the road ahead was still long. But now she saw the truth, and behind all the silence, there was a mistake that had shaped everything. Julia waited for the right moment. She knew the conversation with Richard wouldn't be easy. It wasn't something she could just drop in the middle of a regular day. So one evening after dinner, when the house was calm and Noah was resting, she asked to speak with him privately. They sat in the office, the same room where she had found the locked drawer. Julia didn't waste time. She placed the folder on the desk and opened it in front of him. She pointed to the reports, reading sections aloud. She didn't shout. Her voice was steady but firm. Richard sat still, watching her, not interrupting. Julia continued, showing the side effects of the medications, the descriptions of the methods used, the language used in the notes, how Noah had been treated like a problem to be managed. Then she pulled out her printed research, testimonies from other families, news clippings, and a list of formal complaints. Richard didn't respond right away. His hands were clenched together on his lap, his face pale. He kept his eyes on the pages, reading as Julia turned each one. When she finished, the room fell into silence. Julia waited. Richard stayed quiet for a long time, then leaned forward, elbows on the desk, and covered his face with both hands. "I trusted him," he said quietly. "I paid him. I signed the permissions." His voice broke. "I thought I was doing the right thing." Julia didn't judge him. She knew he hadn't acted out of malice, but the truth still hurt. Richard looked up at her, eyes red. "How much damage did I allow?" he asked. Julia didn't answer directly. Instead, she said, "There's still time to do something about it." That's when Richard made his decision. He didn't retreat into guilt or shame. He stood up, wiped his face, and said, "Let's fix this together." Richard went through the remaining files, collecting every document tied to the neurologist. Julia organized the papers, labeling and sorting everything. They reached out to lawyers who had worked on medical abuse cases. Richard used his resources to get quick meetings. They contacted families mentioned in the forums Julia had found. Some were afraid to talk, others were angry and ready. Julia handled the communication, speaking gently and clearly. Richard offered support and promised discretion. They also got in touch with a local journalist known for investigating healthcare scandals. After a week, they had a growing pile of evidence, reports, personal stories, even old video recordings from the clinic. Richard used his name to draw attention, but he made it clear this wasn't about money. It was about justice. He wanted the truth to come out, not just for Noah, but for every child harmed by that doctor's decisions. At the same time, life inside the house kept moving, and Noah, without knowing any of what was happening, continued to change. His words were still few, but new ones appeared slowly, sometimes in the middle of everyday moments. "Copo," he said one morning when reaching for his cup. "Luz," he whispered while pointing at the ceiling. Julia celebrated quietly, always keeping her voice soft, never rushing. Richard, now more present than ever, sat with Noah each day. He read to him, even when Noah didn't seem to follow. He helped him move around the garden and listened closely when Noah made sounds or tried to speak. They didn't talk about milestones. They just let things happen naturally. The pressure was gone. In its place was patience, something Noah seemed to respond to. His facial expressions became clearer. His eyes followed people more easily. Sometimes he even reached out his hand when he wanted to be near someone. Richard no longer saw Noah through the lens of recovery or repair. He began to see his son for who he was, not for who he had hoped he might become. That change in mindset made all the difference. Julia noticed it too. The house felt different, less like a clinic, more like a home. The staff started to smile more. Therapists adjusted their routines. Sessions became gentler, focused on comfort instead of results. Richard made sure Noah was never alone during treatment. He stayed beside him, held his hand, and asked questions no one had ever asked before. Julia continued to support both of them, filling the gaps no one else could. When news from lawyers or journalists came in, they discussed it in private, never letting it disturb the calm Noah needed. Their plan was to go public soon. They weren't rushing. They were building a case that couldn't be ignored, slowly, carefully, and with purpose. Weeks passed, and the case against the neurologist gained strength. More families joined. Some agreed to testify. The journalist finished a detailed report, filled with stories, records, and interviews. Richard and Julia reviewed it together, making sure every detail was accurate. Meanwhile, Noah continued his quiet progress. He still didn't speak much, but his gestures became clearer. He pointed, smiled, responded to simple questions with a nod or a glance. His favorite word now was maids, used when he wanted more of something, like music or time in the garden. Julia kept a small notebook to track his progress. Richard read it every night. One evening, after dinner, Noah reached for Richard's hand, looked at him and said, "Papai." It was soft and unsure, but clear. Richard didn't cry. He just held his son close. In that moment, everything felt worth it. They were no longer stuck in the past. Together, with Julia by their side, they were finally moving forward. The report went live early on a Monday morning. The headline was direct, and the photo of Dr. Howard Levitt stared back from every screen. The article included Julia's research, Richard's testimony, and several interviews from families who had suffered in silence for years. The journalist had done a thorough job, detailing the techniques used, the lack of oversight, the emotional damage left behind. Within hours, other media outlets picked it up. Radio stations, online forums, even television channels started covering the case. Interviews followed. Julia was hesitant to speak at first, but she did it. Not for recognition, but for the children who couldn't speak for themselves. Richard stood beside her in every appearance. His name added weight to the story, but his calm honesty gave it strength. They spoke about Noah, about the years lost, about what blind trust in authority can cost. More families began contacting them, their inboxes filled with letters and stories. Some of the stories were nearly identical to Noah's. Children treated like projects, experiments, or data points. Other parents described guilt similar to what Richard had felt. The same doctor, the same clinic, a pattern impossible to deny. With the public attention building, legal pressure increased. Medical boards were forced to respond. Within 2 weeks, Dr. Levitt's medical license was suspended pending a full investigation. News stations filmed the moment outside the clinic. A crowd had gathered. Some were quiet. Others held signs. Richard and Julia didn't attend that day. They stayed home with Noah where it mattered most. But they watched from the living room, sitting on the couch as the screen showed the clinic door being locked. It wasn't celebration. It was justice starting to take shape. They knew there was more to do. Lawsuits would come. Some families would need long-term support, but the silence had been broken. What was once hidden was now impossible to ignore. Inside the mansion, life changed. The rooms felt different, not just from decoration or sound, but from how people moved and interacted. Doors stayed open. Light filled the spaces that used to feel cold and closed off. Staff smiled more often. There was no longer a strict schedule hanging over everything. Julia continued working, not as just the housekeeper anymore, but as someone truly involved in the daily life of the family. Richard spent more time downstairs, sitting on the floor with Noah, helping him build puzzles or look through picture books. Noah, now more expressive than ever, had his own routines. He loved crayons and used them to fill blank pages with shapes, lines, and figures. Sometimes messy, sometimes neat. One day, he spent almost an hour carefully choosing colors and drawing without help. Julia watched quietly from across the room, letting him work at his own pace. The house that once echoed with silence now carried signs of growth. Noah laughed more now. He pointed at things he wanted. He said short words when he felt ready. Agua, mais, mau. He didn't always pronounce them perfectly, but no one cared. Progress wasn't measured in perfection. It was measured in freedom. Freedom to express, to choose, to be seen. Julia kept a small notebook of his new words and gestures. Richard added to it too. Noah had even started using his own way of showing feelings, hugging more often, sitting close when he wanted company, or placing his hand on someone's arm when he wanted them to stay. There were still challenges. Some days were harder, but the difference was clear. Everyone in the house now moved with care, not fear. One afternoon, while cleaning the art corner, Julia noticed Noah watching her. He held up a piece of paper. On it were 3 figures, simple, with stick arms and round faces. "Hey, agente," he said quietly. Julia froze and smiled. Julia walked over and sat beside him. She looked at the drawing closely. It showed 3 people holding hands, one tall, one medium, and one small. The small one had orange around the head, Noah's favorite color. The medium one had long lines that looked like hair. The tall one had a square shape on top, maybe meant to be Richard's usual jacket. It was clear what it meant. "That's us?" she asked. Noah nodded once. "É a gente," he repeated, this time with more confidence. Richard entered the room and stopped when he saw the drawing. He didn't say anything right away. He just looked at it for a long time. Then he sat beside them. "Can I keep this one?" he asked. Noah gave a tiny smile and handed him the paper. Julia watched them both, her heart full. That drawing said what none of them had said out loud, but all of them felt. The past still existed. It hadn't disappeared. There were memories that would always hurt, moments that couldn't be undone. But they no longer defined everything. The house was no longer filled with pain. It was filled with presence. Julia still had moments when she remembered her own daughter. Richard still had to live with the choices he made out of desperation. And Noah, even with his progress, still had quiet days, still carried pieces of what had been done to him. But now, they had each other. Richard no longer saw Julia only as the woman who helped his son. He saw her as someone who had helped build everything that came after. She wasn't just a part of Noah's story. She was part of his life, their life, a family, not because of blood or tradition, but because they had chosen to face the hardest parts together. And from that, something real had grown. Noah was still progressing step by step. His changes were steady, not fast, but real. Every week something small would improve. A new sound, a clearer word, a longer gaze. The house had adapted to his rhythm. Nothing was rushed. Julia, now officially his legal guardian, took care of everything related to him. Appointments, therapies, meals, routines. But she did more than that. She was the one he trusted most, the one he always looked for first. Richard signed the documents without hesitation when the time came. It wasn't about giving up his role as a father. It was about recognizing who had truly been by Noah's side when things were hardest. Their bond had become strong, honest, and deep. The 3 of them lived like a real family. They shared duties, they respected each other's space, and they built their life with patience. And even though the world outside had changed, what mattered most was what was happening at home. In the house, Noah played more than ever. He liked organizing his crayons by color, building small towers with blocks, and flipping through picture books with simple drawings. His drawings had more shapes now, sometimes animals, sometimes people, sometimes just circles that he called planets. He didn't always talk, but when he did, the words were clear. Agua, abrazo, papai, bola. Each word meant something. He didn't waste language. He used it only when it mattered. Julia kept track of each new word and smiled every time one came out naturally. One afternoon, as they sat together on the floor with a pile of papers and toys, Noah looked at her, touched her hand, and said, "Ma." It was calm, like he'd always called her that. Julia didn't say anything back at first. She held her reaction, nodded, and smiled through teary eyes. She didn't want to scare the moment away. Later, alone in the hallway, she let the tears fall. Richard had changed too. He wasn't the distant man he once was. Now, he learned from Noah every day. He studied his son's reactions, asked Julia questions, and paid attention to the little details. He knew what snacks Noah preferred, which shirts he didn't like, and how long he would stay focused before needing a break. He stopped treating Noah's growth like a problem to solve and began treating it like something to enjoy. Richard also gave Julia more space to lead, never stepping over her decisions, always including her. Their partnership worked because there was no pride involved, just respect. The legal case was behind them now. The neurologist had been officially removed from practice, and several families were working on settlements. But the real victory was not in the courtroom. It was in the daily routine, the quiet, caring moments of normal life. Breakfasts without stress, afternoons of play, evenings spent in soft conversation. That was where the miracle was happening. One late afternoon, after a calm day of activities, something new and unexpected happened. Julia was organizing books in the living room, dusting off the shelves and setting aside older volumes. Noah had been flipping through books earlier that day and had left a few lying around. She didn't think much of it. He often liked handling books, even if he didn't read them fully. But as she picked up one of the older hardcovers and opened it to check for damage, Noah appeared beside her. He was holding an envelope in both hands. The paper was yellowed and soft from time. "Tava no livro," he said simply. His fingers clutched the envelope carefully. Julia turned to him, curious. "Where did you find it?" she asked. He pointed to a book left open on the couch. She took the envelope slowly and noticed the handwriting on the front. It was neat and delicate. Richard had just walked into the room and froze when he saw it. Richard stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the envelope. He didn't need time to recognize it. "That's her handwriting," he said quietly, almost to himself. His voice was shaky. "It's from Emily." Emily, Noah's mother, had died years ago, and nothing new from her had appeared in a long time. Richard stared at the letter, almost afraid to touch it. But Noah held it out again, this time toward Julia. "Lay," he said. His voice was soft but firm. Julia looked at both of them. She didn't rush. She walked to the couch, sat down, and waited until Richard and Noah joined her. She opened the envelope slowly. Inside was a folded piece of paper, aged but still intact. She unfolded it gently, her hands careful not to tear it. Richard sat beside her, silent, and Noah leaned against her arm. The room was completely still. Then, without drama, without fanfare, Julia began to read. The letter was written in simple words. Emily spoke about love, about hope, and about her fears for Noah's future. She talked about the kind of support she wished he would receive, the kind of patience she hoped someone would give him if she couldn't be there. She mentioned Richard too, telling him not to lose himself in guilt and not to close off his heart. Most of all, she asked that whoever found the letter one day would remind Noah that he was never alone, that he was deeply loved, even before he could understand it. Julia's voice was steady, even when her eyes watered. Richard sat with his hands clasped, his head down. Noah leaned closer, listening, not saying a word. The letter wasn't long, but it said enough. When Julia finished reading, she folded it again and placed it in Noah's lap. No one spoke for a while. They didn't need to. The silence was full of meaning. With trembling hands, Julia unfolded the letter in front of Noah and Richard. The room was quiet. The only sound was the gentle movement of the paper as she opened it. Noah sat beside her, watching closely, and Richard leaned forward, elbows on his knees, eyes fixed on the letter. Julia took a deep breath and began to read. The words were soft and steady, like a voice from the past that hadn't faded. The handwriting was careful, almost like someone had written it slowly, trying to choose the right words. Emily's message wasn't filled with medical concerns or instructions. It was filled with feeling. She spoke of love, of trust, and of intuition. She didn't describe her son's condition in medical terms. Instead, she spoke of the importance of presence. She warned against cold logic, harsh solutions, and people who claimed to know everything. She asked that Noah be protected, not just in body, but in spirit. As Julia continued reading, her voice grew slightly softer. Emily's letter was full of honesty and care. She wrote about the kind of life she hoped her son would have, not surrounded by experts and evaluations, but by people who truly saw him. She didn't beg for help or pity. She simply asked that Noah be raised in love, shielded from the weight of expectations. "Let him be who he is," the letter said, "not who others want him to be." Richard sat back in his chair, eyes filled with emotion. His breathing changed as the words sank in. He realized he had done the opposite for many years. He had handed Noah over to people who only saw a list of symptoms. He had ignored the warning, not out of cruelty, but out of desperation. The guilt hit hard, but there was no anger now. Only regret and a deep need to make it right. Julia paused for a moment after finishing the letter. Her hands stayed on the paper, holding it gently in her lap. She looked down, feeling the weight of the message. It didn't feel like just words on paper. It felt like a voice that had always been there, guiding from the background. She looked at Noah, who was watching her closely. He didn't say anything right away, but his hand reached out and touched her arm. Then he leaned against her shoulder. "Mama sabia," he said quietly. Julia didn't answer. She didn't need to. Her throat was tight, and tears blurred her vision, but she managed to smile. Richard wiped his eyes silently, taking in the moment. This letter, found by chance, had brought everything together. Emily's voice, clear, loving, and brave, had reached them at the exact time they were ready to hear it. Not earlier, not later. Now, when it mattered most. They didn't talk much afterward. Words weren't necessary. Julia folded the letter carefully and placed it in a clean envelope. Richard suggested they keep it somewhere safe, but also somewhere visible. It wasn't just a memory. It was a reminder of what mattered, what had always mattered. Noah continued drawing that afternoon, crayons spread across the table. Julia helped him with nothing. He didn't need help. He picked colors, drew lines, and paused now and then to smile at them. Richard stood nearby, watching. His presence no longer carried tension. He had learned how to stay without controlling everything. Julia sat close, relaxed, just being there. There was no therapy happening, no goals being chased, just the three of them, sitting in peace. Later, when the sky outside started to change colors, Noah stood up and walked slowly toward the hallway. His drawing still in hand, he looked back and waved. "Come," he said, and they followed. In the hallway, the drawing Noah carried earlier was taped to the wall. It was the same one from weeks before, 3 figures holding hands. He stood under it now, staring at it with a smile. Julia and Richard stopped a few steps behind, watching him quietly. Noah turned around, his expression full of confidence, something that hadn't always been there. He pointed at the picture and said again, this time louder, "E agente." His voice was steady, clear, and proud. Julia looked at Richard, and he looked back at her. They didn't need to say anything. The words were enough. That small sentence, from a boy who once never spoke, carried everything. It was a statement of identity, of belonging, of love. Not a dream, not a goal, just the truth of the life they had built. Slowly they walked forward and stood beside him. And in that quiet hallway, nothing more needed to be added. The letter was not a goodbye. It wasn't a farewell from a mother to a son. It was something else. It was a beginning, a bridge between past and present, a message written with hope, delivered at the right time. It connected everything: Noah's silence, Richard's mistakes, Julia's role, and the transformation of the house. What used to be a mansion full of routines and rules had become a home with love, noise, and laughter. The future still held unknowns. There would be challenges ahead. But now they had a foundation built not on fear, but on trust. Julia remained by Noah's side, now fully part of his life. Richard stood strong as a father, finally present in the way his son needed. And Noah, once hidden behind silence, now stood proud beneath his own drawing, speaking with his voice, expressing with his words. The silence that once defined everything had been broken by love, by truth, by the last voice that needed to be heard. Finally, we've reached the end of this story. I'm extremely happy that you've made it this far. Thank you very much for watching. Comment below what you thought and what was the best or worst part. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time.